Blake Shelton's Easter gift to Miranda Lambert. She cried and said, "I never expected this." Some relationships don't end. For 3 years, Blake Shelton carried a letter. He never sent it. He never forgot it. He just kept it. Until Easter morning changed everything. Miranda Lambert didn't know what was coming. Nobody did. Because this wasn't about getting her back. This was about finally being honest about what she meant. And Gwen? She understood something most people never will about loving someone enough to let them face their past. The basket. The notes. The final egg. The letter that changed everything. What happens when two people who love each other finally stop pretending it doesn't matter?
Here in this place, I think.
Like that song isn't just words. It's a feeling. It's that moment when you realize someone got inside you so deep that leaving them doesn't actually remove them. They stay. And Miranda lived that for real. Not once. Again and again. Over years. She'd write songs in empty hotel rooms at 2 a.m. about the worst days of her life. Then she'd have to perform those songs with a smile on her face and pretend it didn't hurt. Blake and Miranda's breakup wasn't like typical celebrity splits you see on TMZ. It was messy. It was real. Both of them actually loved each other. They just couldn't make it work. So they split. They moved on. They built different lives. But somewhere in all that moving forward, something never got finished. Something never got said out loud. That's actually where this Easter thing starts to make sense. The morning came in soft, real quiet. The kind of light that makes you feel safe again. Miranda woke up thinking it'd be normal. Maybe some chocolates, maybe a few laughs, maybe nothing at all. But Blake had been planning this for months. And I'm not talking about planning like, oh, I'll grab something last minute. This was strategic. He thought about every single detail because he knew that details matter when you're trying to tell someone something you've kept locked inside for years. Not the emotional spur of the moment stuff. Actual planning.
But she couldn't believe.
About memories, about how certain moments just stick with you forever, no matter what you do. Blake had kept every note they ever wrote. Every joke. Every inside thing only they got. And he organized it all like a timeline. Like a map of their whole thing together. Gwen was somewhere in that house, watching. She knew exactly what was about to go down. She knew her husband was finally going to have the talk he'd been rehearsing in his head for like 3 years. And she was cool with it. Because sometimes loving someone means letting them finally say the stuff they need to say. Miranda opened the first egg. Then the next one. Each one had something written on it. A memory. Remember Texas? Another one just had a date. Not just any date. The one day where everything actually fell apart but somehow never really ended. And here's where it gets crazy. That wasn't even the main thing. That was just Blake saying, hey, I didn't forget any of this. Not a single second. And Miranda felt it hit her. You could see it in her face. Her breathing changed. Her hands were shaking a little because she suddenly got it. This wasn't just him being nostalgic or whatever. This was real. This was about unfinished business. The last egg was still sitting there. Different from the others. It felt heavier somehow, even though it probably weighed the same. No label. No clues. Just waiting. And Miranda hesitated before she opened it because part of her already knew. Once you open that, something's gonna shift. You know that feeling when you're at one of those crossroads and you can actually feel that one choice is gonna change everything. She picked it up slow. Blake didn't move. Didn't say anything. Just waited. The quiet between them said more than any words could because they both knew what was coming. This wasn't about the past anymore. This was about right now. This was about whether they could finally have the actual conversation they'd been dodging since the day they broke up. Inside wasn't chocolate. Wasn't some clever joke. It was a letter. Folded careful. Protected like it mattered. And when Miranda unfolded it, she read the first line once. Then again. That's when everything shifted.
And I learned to play guitar.
The song hits different when you're standing in front of the person who basically inspired it. When you're reading words they wrote trying to explain why things ended the way they did. And Miranda felt every word of that letter doing exactly what Blake wanted. Making her remember. Making her feel. making her face the fact that just because you move on doesn't mean you actually get over someone. Her voice was barely there when she finally spoke, and Blake moved closer. Not too close, just enough to actually be there with her. "This is everything we didn't finish," he said. And boom. There it was. The real reason for all of this. Not like closure exactly, but honesty. Real, uncomfortable, risky honesty about what they meant to each other and if that meant anything now. Miranda's hand started shaking. Not dramatic, just enough to show that all the walls she'd built were starting to crack. She tried to smile, but it didn't work because she was too busy processing what was actually happening. Blake wasn't asking her to take him back. He was asking her to finally say out loud that what they had still mattered. Even years later, even with other people in their lives now. She read parts of the letter out loud. Pieces about wondering what would have happened if they'd made different choices. About keeping that letter since the day she left. About carrying it through everything after. And you could feel something shifting in that room. Not like resolution, opening, like a door that had been locked forever was finally being unlocked, and both of them were terrified and relieved at the same time. "Why now?" she asked. Simple question. But it meant everything. Why not last year? Why not wait? Why Easter? Why this exact moment right here? Because I didn't want another year going by pretending it didn't matter. And that's the thing about closure that nobody really talks about. Sometimes it doesn't look like what you think it will. Sometimes it's not about getting back together or fixing what broke. Sometimes it's just about finally being honest that some people change you forever. Some people don't really leave even when they walk away. Miranda's eyes filled. Not right away. Not dramatic. But slowly, like something inside her finally let go of something had been holding tight for years. And when those tears came, they weren't just about Blake. They were about every moment they'd shared. Every song she'd written about him. Every performance where she had to smile while remembering. Kelly Clarkson's been in this exact place too. She gets it on a level most people don't. She's lived it publicly, that moment where you gotta choose between protecting yourself and actually feeling what you're feeling. And watching Miranda choose to actually feel everything in that moment was like watching someone finally give themselves permission to hurt and heal at the same time. The basket was just sitting there on the table forgotten. Chocolates unwrapped. Eggs scattered everywhere. Little notes like pieces of a story that finally made sense. And both of them were just standing there in that soft Easter light, finally saying the things they should have said years ago. Blake smiled a little. "Only you would make me do this." And Miranda smiled back. Not full. But enough. "Okay," she said quietly. Just one word. But it meant so much. Not "okay, I'm taking you back," but "okay, I'm not shutting this down." "Okay, maybe we can finally actually talk. Okay, this still matters." What happens after the tears stop and things settle down is the part that nobody talks about. Because this isn't a movie where everything gets wrapped up with a bow and the credits roll. This is real life. It's messier and more complicated and somehow more honest than any script could ever be. Miranda actually called Kelly Clarkson the next day. Not because she needed advice or whatever, but because Kelly gets something real about surviving heartbreak when everyone's watching. She's written her own songs about her own breakups. She's performed those songs 1,000 times while basically reliving the worst moments of her life on stage.
The way you did, you felt so.
Song became the anthem for like everyone who ever had to rebuild themselves after someone left. But here's what people don't get. Writing that song didn't mean Kelly suddenly moved past the pain. It meant she learned to carry it differently. And Miranda understood that now. She'd been carrying Blake in every lyric she wrote for years without even really admitting it to herself. How they talked to each other shifted after Easter. Not right away. Not in some dramatic way. But the whole dynamic changed because they finally got honest. They weren't protecting each other anymore. They weren't pretending their connection didn't matter. They were just two people saying, yeah, this mattered. And I needed you to know that I never forgot. Blake and Gwen's relationship actually got stronger in a weird way because of that moment. Because Gwen got to see Blake finally close a chapter he'd been avoiding. And real closure looks like two people sitting in the same room and admitting that they matter to each other without needing to be together. It's about respecting someone enough to let them know they changed you forever, even though forever doesn't mean forever together.
I'll be your honeybee.
That song gets at something specific about relationships that ended but never actually finished. It's about the things you want to say but can't quite find the words for. It's about loving someone and hurting them at the same time. And that's exactly what Blake and Miranda were finally letting themselves acknowledge. The story spread online because people needed it to spread. People were tired of celebrity stuff being just gossip or scandal. They wanted to see the real messy part. The part where two people who loved each other still didn't work out. The part where you can move on and move forward, but never fully move away from someone who changed your entire life direction. Comments started flooding in from people sharing their own stories. People who had their own Blake and Miranda moment. Relationships that ended but never truly. People who kept letters or photos or memories because letting them go felt impossible. And what people kept saying was simple, but powerful. I needed to see this. I needed to know I wasn't alone and still caring about someone who isn't mine anymore. That's the real story here. Not whether they get back together. Not whether they become best friends or whatever. But whether they can finally be honest about the fact that some people don't just disappear when they walk away. Some people stay in your bones. Some people shape you so completely that even time and distance and new relationships can't erase what they meant. Miranda actually wrote a song after that Easter morning. She didn't put it out right away, though. She let it sit. Let it marinate. Let the feelings settle into something she could actually express without it all just spilling out raw everywhere.
Be used to the cold.
That song is about protection and walls and learning to love again after getting hurt. And everyone just assumed it was another breakup song. But if you really listen, it's about something more complicated than that. It's about deciding whether to keep your walls up or let someone in knowing they might hurt you again. Blake did an interview months later where he talked about that Easter morning. He said it was one of the scariest things he'd ever done. Not because he was afraid she'd say no or whatever, but because he was finally saying out loud something he'd kept private for years. He was afraid of what it would mean to admit that he'd never actually gotten over it, even though he moved on. That's a thing nobody really separates. Moving on and getting over are completely different. You can build a whole new life. You can fall in love with someone else. You can be happy and fulfilled and still have this corner of your heart that belongs to someone who mattered in a way you can't explain to people who weren't there. What really struck people was how respectful the whole thing was. There was no drama, no anger, no trying to rewrite history or pretend things were different. Just two people saying this mattered. You mattered, and I needed you to know that I never forgot. Blake and Miranda started doing interviews together. Not as a couple, but as two artists who'd shared something real and were finally comfortable talking about it. And the chemistry between them was obvious, but not in the way people expected. It was actual. It was the kind of connection you get when two people have genuinely known each other deeply.
Church town, there's a gold dirt road to a whole lot of nothing.
That song is about finding peace with where you are and who you are. And both Blake and Miranda seemed to find that peace by finally having the conversation they'd been avoiding. They weren't trying to change the past. They weren't trying to make things work that obviously didn't. They were just trying to understand and honor what they'd had. The real question that kept hanging around wasn't, are they getting back together? It was something bigger. What does it actually mean when you love someone but can't be with them? And honestly, that question doesn't have a simple answer. It means different things to different people. But for Blake and Miranda, it seemed to mean finally being able to breathe around each other without faking it. Gwen did an interview where she talked about supporting Blake through that whole thing. And what she said was simple but kind of profound. She said sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is let them finally close a door they've been keeping open for years. And that's what she did. She supported Blake having that conversation because she understood that unfinished stuff will destroy a marriage faster than almost anything else. The months after were about processing. Both of them. In their own ways. Miranda performed at events and people would ask her about Blake and she'd give real answers instead of deflecting. Blake did the same. They weren't bitter. They weren't angry, they were just honest about what happened and what it meant. The internet kept waiting for the big dramatic ending. Either they'd get back together, or there'd be some explosion. But that's not what happened. What happened was quieter and more real. They learned to respect each other's journeys, even though their paths had gone different directions. They learned that you can love someone and let them go at the same time. And that Easter morning, it became this moment that people kept coming back to because it felt like actual humanity in a world where celebrity relationships are usually just tabloid stuff or Instagram content. It felt real because it was real. Two people who loved each other, hurt each other, and finally decided to be honest about the fact that both of those things were true and would always be true. The story isn't about happy endings or tragic ones. It's about honesty. About the courage it takes to finally say the things you've been holding inside for years. About recognizing that some people don't get tied up with a bow and put in the past. Some people stay. Some people shape who you become. And the healthiest thing you can do is acknowledge that and move forward knowing it's there. If you've had your own Blake and Miranda moment, you know exactly what this feels like. That moment when you see someone who changed your life and everything hits you at once. The good memories and the painful ones all mix together until you can't separate them anymore. And you know how rare it is to find someone who's actually willing to finally have that conversation with you. That's why this mattered so much. Not because two famous people might get back together, but because they showed everyone watching that it's okay to say what something meant even after it's over. It's okay to carry someone in your heart even when they're not in your life. And it's okay to finally talk about that instead of pretending you've completely moved on. The thing here is simple. Real relationships don't end cleanly. They don't resolve into perfect closure or bitter endings. They stick with you. They teach you. They shape who you become. And sometimes, if you're brave enough, you get to have a conversation about what they meant. And that conversation, that moment of finally being seen by someone who knew you that way, might be the closest thing to healing that actually exists.